A skilled teacher remains the key to effective instruction. This quote was stated the first week of Summer Institute and has been in the back of my mind this whole entire time at INSA. But what does it mean to be a skilled teacher? Well, to me, it means that a teacher can reflect. Looking back, I have noticed that I have learned many tools that I want to incorporate into my classroom. Engaging lessons and the use of technology are just a few things that are going to make my classroom unique. A skilled teacher also needs to find out who they are. Discovering who I am as a teacher is just as important as having my students telling me who they are. If I am confident in who I am in the classroom, my students will reciprocate the same energy. A skilled teacher collaborates. Collaborating with my fellow scholars and teachers has allowed me to discuss important topics and changing my thinking of education as a whole. A skilled teacher makes changes based on feedback. During my Mission to Mars camp, the feedback that I've received from my reflective leader has allowed me to debrief who I am as a teacher and has allowed me to grow. A skilled teacher remains the key to effective instruction, a quote stated early on in my education degree, but will last a lifetime.
Throughout the Golden Apple experience, I feel like I've really grown professionally. The two core competencies of Golden Apple that I've really most identified with would be the cultural competency and best practices. Throughout the entire first week, I really enjoyed the STEM inquiry lessons and really learned a lot about my best practices, especially because I really learned that knowledge is constructed and that you have to give students multiple pathways to get to the answer and that you should accept all these pathways and not just one, because that's how students are really going to grow. And later in reflective, I learned a lot about different Kagan strategies that can be used to either introduce a lesson as a warm-up or used as brain breaks. And I actually got to use these in my class at Tonti, and they really helped with social emotional learning, kind of engaging those math skills, and it really helped me grow as a person to know that these are skills that students are always going to have to learn. And something that I really wanted to learn throughout this entire Golden Apple experience was the life skills aspect and incorporating those into my math class, because I want my students to grow as better people and not just mathematicians. And then the thing I wanted to focus most on with best practices would be wait time, just because I realized students really need a lot of time, and maybe one student might get it in 5 seconds, but I need the majority of my students to have the time to be able to think and process. And then along with cultural competency, I learned a lot in the tough questions class and tough topics when we talked about the selfie. So I gave the students the time to be able to express themselves and show their own gender, their sex, what they identify with, their values, and just things like that to give a little snapshot of who they are. So being able to relate everything back to them is really what's going to be most important, and that's how I've grown the most this summer at SI.
Okay. What about the speed? Mars? Okay. Oh! That was my very
The core competencies that I grew the most in this SI were civic engagement and professionalism. A quote that I adopted as my motto was, "We teach students, not science." I feel like this quote exemplifies the civic engagement lessons we learned this SI because it ensures that we are putting our students above our content. If we as teachers sit back and only reflect on what the history books write about us, then we are failing our students. I also believe that in order to enact the change that we want to see in the history books, we must remain professional in the ways that we act and interact with others, and the way that we present ourselves to the public. We are representatives of ourselves, our schools, our students, and we should take pride in that. And that's only done if we remain professional, which I have changed my definition of time and time again, and it happened again here at SI. I ultimately think that all the 5 core competencies are very important, but for me, civic engagement and professionalism really went hand in hand, and the definitions are constantly changing still, but SI definitely contributed.
In 5 weeks, there have been 24 different seminars, 7 days of on-site, 4 days of STEM Institute, 3 field trips, 1 day of mock interviews, and 22 days of reflecting on how I can better impact my students. In 5 weeks, I've been challenged and failed. I've questioned my endorsement areas, I've questioned my teaching practices, and I've questioned myself. In 5 weeks, I've learned how to persevere when I am frustrated. I've learned how to rely on my colleagues for support. I've learned how to better myself for my students. I've learned how growth mindset and best practices are the best practices. In 5 weeks, learning and then doing have been my biggest struggle. Breaking habits and ingrained methods of praise, shifting away from effort and instead to growth, replacing failure with learning. In 5 weeks, I've been allowed to implement these strategies through inquiry-based learning, through small group interaction, and through co-teaching a STEM camp. In 5 weeks, I've learned how to create culture and community within my classroom, where academic risks are promoted when students feel supported, creating a classroom of belonging and confidentiality, and embracing discomfort and ambiguity. In 5 weeks, I've realized that I don't teach content, I teach kids. I teach kids how to be civically engaged. I teach kids how to problem solve. I teach kids how to take control of their own learning. In 5 weeks, I've become a better teacher, but I know there is still so much to learn. I know that I can always better myself, and I know that I have a support system behind me.